My sister-in-law didn't know I could understand Korean. For 28 years, she and my mother-in-law spoke freely in front of me, convinced I was too simple to learn their language. And then, at my husband's retirement party, surrounded by his entire family and colleagues, I heard them discussing something that made my hands shake. What happened next changed the rest of my life. Welcome to Twisted VRX Stories. Before we dive in, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community around the world. Now settle in, because this is a story about patience, betrayal, and the power of understanding more than people think you do. I met my husband James at a marketing conference in Seattle in 1989. I was 34 years old, working as an executive assistant at a mid-sized architecture firm. He was 36, charming, successful, with a corner office and a quick smile that made me feel like the only person in the room. We clicked immediately over terrible conference coffee and complaints about the keynote speaker. James was Korean-American, born in Seoul but raised in Los Angeles from age 5. His family had built a successful import-export business, and he ran the West Coast operations. He was American in every way that mattered to me: fluent English, no accent, loved baseball and Bruce Springsteen. His Korean heritage seemed like a footnote, something interesting but not particularly relevant to us. We dated for a year before he proposed. I said yes without hesitation. I was 35, watching my younger cousins get engaged while I worked late nights and ate takeout alone in my apartment. My mother had stopped asking about my dating life, which somehow felt worse than her questions. James felt like my last chance at the life I'd always imagined: marriage, family, a partner to grow old with. The first warning sign came at our engagement dinner at his mother's house in Bellevue. His mother, Mrs. Park, everyone called her that, even James, had prepared an elaborate meal. The dining table was covered with dishes I couldn't name. James's younger sister, Michelle, was there with her husband and 2 young children. Throughout the evening, Mrs. Park and Michelle kept having conversations in Korean, rapid exchanges that would make James's face tighten, though he always smiled when I asked what they'd said. "Nothing important," he'd tell me. "Mom was just commenting on the food." Michelle was talking about the kids, but the way they'd both look at me afterwards suggested otherwise. After we married, I learned that James's family was close in a way I hadn't quite grasped during our courtship. Mrs. Park expected weekly dinners at her house, no exceptions. Michelle called James every single day, sometimes twice. The 2 of them made decisions together about everything from family finances to which charities the family foundation should support, all while chatting comfortably in Korean whenever I was in the room. I asked James once, early on, why they switched to Korean so often. "It's easier for Mom," he said. "Some thoughts just come more naturally in Korean for her." And Michelle grew up bilingual. You know how it is. I didn't know, actually, but I nodded like I understood. I wanted to be supportive, accommodating, the perfect daughter-in-law. Within our first year of marriage, I noticed how many major decisions James made after phone calls with Michelle. Where we would vacation, always places that worked for Michelle's family too. Which car I should drive? Michelle had opinions. Whether we should buy or rent our first home, Michelle knew a realtor. James insisted it was just sisterly advice, that I was being paranoid when I suggested Michelle had too much influence. "She's my little sister," he said, his voice sharp in a way it rarely was with me. "She's family. You don't get to pick and choose which parts of my family you accept." So I stopped mentioning it. I smiled at weekly dinners while Mrs. Park and Michelle chatted in Korean over dishes I learned to help prepare but never quite got right. I listened to James's daily phone calls with Michelle, understanding nothing except the occasional English word that slipped through. We tried for children for 6 years. 6 years of doctors, treatments, hope, and crushing disappointment. James wanted kids desperately. Michelle already had 4 by then, and Mrs. Park made sure I knew how important grandchildren were to Korean families. She never said directly that I was failing, but she didn't need to. The way she cooed over Michelle's children while barely acknowledging me said everything. When we finally accepted it wasn't going to happen, something shifted in our marriage. James grew colder, more distant. He started working longer hours. He stopped asking about my day. Our conversations became logistical: what bills needed paying, who would be home when, what time dinner would be ready. Then James suggested I should quit my job. "We don't need the money," he said. "And honestly, it would help if you could focus on the house. Maybe take on more responsibilities with Mom. She's getting older." I loved my job. I'd worked my way up from assistant to office manager, overseeing a team of 5. My colleagues were my friends. But James was insistent in that quiet, immovable way of his, the way that made me feel selfish for wanting something different than what he'd decided. I quit. I told myself it was temporary, that I could always go back to work later. That marriage meant compromise. I was 42 years old, and I made myself believe this was what being a good wife looked like. 26 years passed. 26 years of cooking meals no one complimented, hosting parties for James's colleagues, driving Mrs. Park to her doctor appointments, watching Michelle's children grow up while having none of my own. I became invisible even to myself. The ambitious woman I'd been at 34, with her own office and her own paycheck and her own dreams, disappeared so completely I could barely remember her. The Korean conversations continued, of course. At every family dinner, every holiday, every phone call, James and Michelle would speak in Korean while I sat quietly, occasionally asking what was funny when they'd laugh, always getting the same answer that it was nothing, just an inside joke. Mrs. Park would give instructions in Korean that James would later summarize for me in English, edited versions that I suspect left out the critical parts. I started noticing that major financial decisions seemed to happen after these Korean conversations. James would hang up with Michelle and announce we needed to invest in something, or loan money to a family friend, or fund Michelle's husband's new business venture. Our joint accounts, which technically had my name on them, were managed entirely by James. He handled all the investments, all the planning. "You don't need to worry about this stuff," he'd tell me when I asked questions. "It's taken care of." I believed him because what choice did I have? I had no job, no independent income, no real understanding of our financial situation beyond the monthly allowance James deposited into my personal checking account for groceries and household expenses. I was 68 years old with no safety net. This was simply my life now. And then, 3.5 years ago, something shifted. I was at the public library in Bellevue, returning some books, when a flyer on the community board caught my eye. Korean language classes for seniors, Mondays and Wednesdays, 10 a.m., free. No experience necessary. I stood there, staring at that flyer for what must have been 5 minutes. People walked past me. Someone asked if I was okay. I nodded automatically, unable to look away from those words. Korean language classes. Something sparked inside me, something I thought had died decades ago. Curiosity, rebellion, a tiny, fierce desire to know what they'd been saying about me all these years. I took a photo of the flyer with my phone. My hands were shaking. James thought I spent Monday and Wednesday mornings at a book club at the library. It wasn't entirely a lie. There was a book club that met Tuesdays, and I did attend occasionally. But mostly, I drove to the community center and sat in a sunny classroom with 12 other seniors, learning Korean from a patient teacher named Miss Kim. At first, it was terrifying. My 65-year-old brain felt rusty, resistant. The alphabet looked like abstract art. The grammar made no sense. Younger students absorbed everything while I struggled with basic greetings. But Miss Kim encouraged me constantly. "You're doing better than you think," she'd say. "Korean is hard for English speakers, but you're persistent. That matters more than natural talent." I practiced obsessively. When James was at work and I was alone in our big, empty house, I watched Korean dramas with subtitles. I downloaded language apps. I listened to Korean news radio while cooking dinner. I practiced writing characters while James watched baseball in the other room, hiding my notebook when he walked in. The secrecy became addictive. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, I had something that was entirely mine. Something James didn't know about, something Michelle couldn't control. It was my rebellion, quiet and patient, growing stronger week by week. Months became a year, then 2 years, then 3. My comprehension grew steadily. I could follow conversations now, understand TV shows, read signs and menus. My speaking was still weak. I rarely practiced out loud, but my listening had become nearly fluent. I understood probably 80% of what I heard, and slowly, gradually, I began to understand what they'd been saying about me all these years. It started small. Overhearing Mrs. Park tell Michelle that my kimchi was too bland, that James deserved better cooking. Michelle agreeing, laughing about how I'd worn the wrong color to a funeral, how everyone noticed, me standing 10 feet away, loading the dishwasher, understanding every word. Then bigger things. Michelle telling James I seemed slower lately, asking if he'd considered having me evaluated. James agreeing that I did seem to be declining, that maybe early dementia ran in my family. Mrs. Park suggesting James put the house and major accounts in only his name, just to be safe, given my condition. I began to piece together 28 years of conversations that had happened right in front of me. Critiques of my appearance, my intelligence, my worth. Discussions about my failures as a wife, as a daughter-in-law. Plans made without my input about money that was supposedly ours together. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. It hurt more than I can describe. But alongside the hurt came something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity, cold, focused anger, and a determination to wait for exactly the right moment. That moment came at James's retirement party. He'd decided to retire at 68 from the family business, passing his responsibilities to Michelle's oldest son. He wanted a big celebration, 60 guests at an upscale restaurant on the waterfront in Seattle. His decision, his guest list, his party. He told me what to wear. A navy dress, modest, age-appropriate. The party was in full swing when I saw Michelle and Mrs. Park standing together near the windows, overlooking the sound. They were speaking in Korean, their voices low but animated. Something about the way they kept glancing toward James, then toward me, made me move closer. I pretended to admire the view, positioning myself just behind them. I listened. 28 years, Mrs. Park was saying, shaking her head. I still don't understand why he married her. She brought nothing to the family. No children, no connections, not even pretty. Michelle laughed softly. I know, Uma, but you know, Appa, he felt sorry for her. She was so old already, so desperate. It was almost a charity case. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face neutral, my eyes on the water. At least the house is secured now, Michelle continued. Everything important is in the family trust. When he's gone, she gets the minimum the law requires. The rest goes where it should have always gone, to my children, real family. Mrs. Park nodded approvingly. You handled that well, getting him to sign those papers last year. She was too stupid to question anything. She never questions anything, Michelle said, her voice dripping with contempt. She just smiles and nods and cooks bad food and takes up space. Honestly, I feel bad for Appa. Imagine being married to someone so boring for almost 30 years. 28 years. 28 years of my life. And I was nothing to them, less than nothing, an unfortunate burden, easily dismissed, conveniently stupid. Something inside me crystallized. All the anger, all the hurt, all the quiet rebellion of the past 3 years clicked into focus like a camera lens finally finding clarity. I took a deep breath, turned, and walked toward them. I kept my face pleasant, my voice calm and clear. When I reached them, I spoke in Korean. Mrs. Park, Michelle, thank you both for coming tonight to celebrate James. The looks on their faces will stay with me forever. Mrs. Park's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Michelle literally stumbled backward, nearly dropping her wine glass. Her face went from tan to pale in seconds. You, Michelle stammered, switching to English. You don't speak Korean. I do, I replied, still in Korean. I've understood everything for 3.5 years now. Every conversation, every insult, every cruel thing you've said while I stood right there. Mrs. Park recovered first, her expression hardening. This changes nothing, she said coldly, in English now. James, Michelle, this woman is trying to cause trouble. But I wasn't done. People nearby had started to notice something was happening. Conversations quieted. Guests turned toward us. I could have handled this privately, pulled James aside later, dealt with it behind closed doors. But 28 years of being invisible, of being mocked in a language I wasn't supposed to understand, of being erased from my own marriage, had built up inside me like steam in a pressure cooker. I raised my voice just enough to carry across the room. I switched to English so everyone would understand. "I want everyone here to know something," I announced. "For 28 years, my husband's mother and sister have spoken about me in Korean, believing I couldn't understand. Tonight, I heard them discussing how stupid I am, how I was a charity case when James married me, how they manipulated James into putting everything in a family trust that cuts me out, how relieved they'll be when I'm gone." Gasps rippled through the crowd. James was pushing through people toward us, his face red. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. "Ask your sister," I said calmly. "Ask her to explain, in English this time, what she just said about me, about our marriage, about the trust you signed last year that she arranged." Michelle's composure cracked. "You're twisting everything. You don't understand the context, the culture." "I understand perfectly." I cut her off. "I understand that you've manipulated my husband for our entire marriage. I understand that you've stolen from me, lied about me, and convinced him I'm mentally declining so he wouldn't question your control." I turned to James. "Did you really think I had dementia? Or did that just make it easier to justify signing papers without discussing them with me?" James looked between Michelle and me, confusion and anger fighting for control of his expression. "I don't know what you think you heard, but—" "I heard enough," I said. "I heard 28 years worth of contempt, and I'm done." I looked at the crowd of shocked faces, at Mrs. Park's fury, at Michelle's panic. I spent nearly 3 decades invisible in my own marriage, dismissed as too simple to understand, too unimportant to include. But I'm not invisible anymore, and I'm not staying another day. I walked out of that restaurant with nothing but my purse and the navy dress James had chosen for me. I had no car, James had driven us. I had limited access to our accounts. But I had myself, fully present for the first time in decades. One of James's colleagues, a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, who I'd always liked, followed me outside. She caught up to me on the sidewalk. "My car is right here," she said quietly. "I'll drive you wherever you need to go. And for what it's worth, I always thought there was something off about how they treated you. I'm sorry I never said anything." I asked her to take me to my cousin Linda's house in Tacoma. Linda, who had been telling me for years something wasn't right in my marriage, who had offered me a guest room more times than I could count. Linda, who opened her door at 10 p.m., took one look at my face and simply pulled me into a hug. The next 6 months were a hurricane of lawyers and forensic accountants and ugly truths. James alternated between begging me to come home and having his attorney send threatening letters. Michelle called me repeatedly, sometimes crying about how I was destroying the family, sometimes coldly informing me I had no legal standing for anything. But Washington is a community property state. Everything acquired during a marriage, regardless of whose name it's on, belongs equally to both spouses. The house, the investments, the retirement accounts, even portions of the family business James had built during our marriage. All of it was half mine. My attorney, a fierce woman named Rebecca Santos, who took my case partly on principle, uncovered everything. The family trust Michelle had convinced James to sign did try to divert assets away from me. The investments made in Michelle's husband's name. The life insurance policies that named Michelle as beneficiary instead of me. The offshore accounts James thought were hidden. "He tried to steal from you," Rebecca told me during one meeting, sliding documents across her desk. They all did, but they weren't as clever as they thought they were, and a judge is not going to look kindly on a man who tried to defraud his wife of 68 years with help from his family. The divorce was finalized 9 months after that retirement party. I walked away with the house, which I immediately sold, half of all retirement accounts, a significant settlement for the hidden assets, my portion of James's Social Security benefits. And, most satisfying, a legal requirement that James and Michelle repay the money they'd diverted from our joint accounts over the years. For the first time in my adult life, I had my own money, my own bank account with only my name on it, my own decisions to make about my own future. I bought a small craftsman house in Port Townsend with a view of the water and a garden I could tend myself. I'm 71 now, and I wake up every morning in a space that belongs only to me. I still practice my Korean. It's funny, the skill I learned in secret, the small rebellion I nurtured in stolen hours, became the key that unlocked my entire future. If I hadn't understood that conversation at the retirement party, I might still be there, still invisible, still believing I had no choice. Last month, I ran into Dr. Chen at a farmer's market. She told me that James and Michelle had completely fallen out. Apparently, after the divorce settlement forced them to liquidate assets, Michelle blamed James for being careless, for not realizing I'd learned Korean. She told people he'd let me take advantage of him. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. "James," she said, "looks terrible." He's alone in a small apartment, his relationship with Michelle destroyed, Mrs. Park barely speaking to him for losing the family money. He tells people I ruined his life. I thought about that as I drove home along the coast. Did I ruin his life? Or did I simply refuse to let him and his family ruin what remained of mine? I think about the woman I was at, 34, so hopeful, so eager to be chosen, to belong somewhere. I think about the woman I became over those 28 years, shrinking and fading until I almost disappeared completely. And I think about the woman I am now, sitting on my porch in Port Townsend, watching eagles hunt over the water. I learned more than a language in those classes at the community center. I learned that it's never too late to reclaim yourself. I learned that being underestimated can be a weapon if you're patient and strategic. I learned that the cage I thought was locked had a door I could open any time I found the courage. My advice to anyone listening who finds themselves in a similar situation is this: start somewhere, anywhere, take a class. Open a separate bank account, even if you just put $20 a month in it. Talk to a lawyer. Most offer free consultations. Find one small piece of yourself that belongs only to you and nurture it like a seed in winter. Because you never know when that seed will become the strength you need to walk out the door. I never thought at 68 years old that my life could start over. I thought I was too old, too dependent, too worn down by decades of being small. I was wrong. I was so wrong. This second chapter, this life I've built in my 70s, is richer and truer than anything that came before. If you're out there right now feeling invisible, feeling trapped, feeling like there's no way forward, I want you to know something. There is a way forward. There is always a way forward. And you deserve to find it, no matter your age, no matter how long you've been waiting, no matter how impossible it seems. That's my story. If it resonated with you, please like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to Twisted VRX Stories for more true stories of everyday people facing extraordinary circumstances. And remember, it's never too late to become who you were always meant to be.